Well, that was really, really great. Thank you guys to our producers for making all of this happen. Welcome to the 6 steps to master your workers' comp claim. My name is Carmen, and joining me today is my co host, Bilal Kassim, who also happens to be one of the best workers' comp attorneys here in California. How are you, Bilal? Thank you for
I'm
joining
doing
me.
good. I'm doing good.
Glad to hear. We have a lot going on today in regards to what we would like to cover and essentially get, I guess, as much information as we can to those that have been registering for our live webinar. If you happen to catch this live on YouTube as well, make sure that you guys stay towards the end because that's when we're going to give you the opportunity to download an ultimate checklist that we've created in order for you to be able to kind of just make sure that, if you don't have representation, that you're keeping your comp case on check. That's essentially what it is. It's going to help you really understand where to focus in and ultimately just give you that safety net of feeling like, okay, cool, I have all my T's crossed, I have all my I's dotted. So I know that I am working on my best to be able to get the best outcome, which is essentially what every injured worker wants in California. So without further ado, let's kind of jump into this a little bit. I'm going to be sharing my screen so you guys can see a little bit of what we are going to be talking about. So it's going to go in and out constantly based on what we're going to be discussing. Obviously, you guys also have the opportunity to write on the chats. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you guys can comment right below any questions you might have. Please feel free to just chat with us. We'll be answering a lot of the questions towards the end of the webinar, but who knows? We might just answer one of the questions that we just so happen to see as we glance over, and it's with the topic that we're discussing. So, super interesting. This is the career of choice for Bilal Kassim. It's what he loves to do. And he's really good at it. So I'm excited to be able to do this. So first of all, Bilal, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for those that don't know Pacific Workers and don't know who Bilal Kassim is?
Sure. So my name's Bilal Kassim. I'm an attorney. I've been working in workers' comp now for, oh Lord, probably 14, 15 years. Oddly enough, I was a clerk for a workers' compensation law firm while I was in college. And at the time, I didn't even know I wanted to go to law school. I didn't even really know what workers' comp was. And, I told my employer, like, see you guys, I'm going off to law school. I wish you the best. And, here I am today. And oddly enough, I still know of them. I still see them on occasion in court and things like that. I came full circle and, I've been doing workers' comp pretty much ever since I graduated law school. I used to represent employers and insurance companies on the defense side of things. And, fortunately for me, I got out early enough. But, at the time I had realized, representing the insurance companies and employers was not necessarily something I wanted to spend my entire career on. I wanted to dedicate my skills to the people that really need it most, the individuals
Yeah,
that make up our community, the working individuals. My
right.
mom was a teacher and my dad was an auto mechanic growing up. And, I saw how hard they worked, how underpaid they were, certainly I felt inspired enough to take my skills and efforts and put them
Oh,
towards
it
helping
looks like
those that are in
you
need the
froze a
most.
little bit. Okay, we kind of lost you a little bit, but that's totally fine. I'm kind of glad you brought up this whole type of community and kind of shared as like you're still going to a full circle and bumping into some of the people that you've essentially started with, right? And it's important to know that it is a small community in the workers' compensation system. And it's a beautiful thing, somewhat, because if you think about it, as an attorney, the judges know you. And it's important to be from the area when you're advocating for injured workers in this area. So, a lot of the times, what happens is, bigger law firms from different states, from even different parts of California, will try to kind of come in and also be able to fight for the injured workers. And I'm not saying they do a horrible job. However, there is a smaller community where judges know who's who, they respect each other, their colleagues at the end of the day. Not to say that they're best friends. However, you kind of get a glimpse as to who's who and who's all about the positive, who's negative, and that can somewhat impact your outcome and then just the experience in general. as you're fighting in, going through a trial, going through a hearing? Is the judge going to think that you're, just some random ass person? Or does the judge know that, you know what, Bilal Qasim is a really great guy. I've had many cases with him. He has never tried to pull a fast one on us. So it's kind of like that whole respect kind of changes a little bit when you're
Yeah.
new in the system.
Carmen, I don't want to derail you too much here, but when I was a defense attorney way back in the day, I was in the Bay Area kind of for the first time. I went to court in San Jose as a defense attorney. And this judge has myself and the injured workers attorney in his office. And we go in there, and immediately the injured workers attorney and the judge are talking about like the book club that they're in together. And I knew instantly, whatever the issue was, it did not matter. I was about to get railroaded, That's
That sucks. And it
exactly
happens.
what you're talking about, though. You're right.
It 100% happens, unfortunately. Well, let's get started. And I'm going to share my screen now. So, for those of you guys following along, please join us as we essentially move on and kind of try to brief you briefly, as fast as we can, what it is that we're going to focus on in regards to your workers' comp case and how to keep track of it. So, of course, there are 6 steps that we've kind of highlighted. So we've decided that these are kind of like those 6 steps that are the most important, the most crucial ones that are going to either make or break your case. Obviously, there's a lot more that we can dive into. However, that would take us complete all day to do. So we don't want to steal your time as much. We want to get this done in a really fast environment, but also very informative. So bear with us. Again, if you have questions, please go ahead on the chats, and whether you're on YouTube and following through directly through there, then you can do so, and we can still see your comments as well. So here are a couple of the topics that we're going to be discussing. We're going to introduce a little bit about the workers' compensation world. For those of you that are new, don't understand exactly how the system works here in California, we're going to give you a brief explanation. We're also going to go over that case checklist that we're going to be discussing on, common mistakes to avoid, reporting the injuries, when to start your medical treatment, how do you ensure accurate payments, and those important facts that we know are going to help you move forward with your case. So, without further ado, Bilal, will you kind of walk us a little bit into what workers' compensation is in California?
Yeah, of course. So workers' compensation, it's a benefits delivery system, right? The whole idea is that people get injured at work. Oftentimes, it's not anyone's particular fault. It's just the risk that jobs have inherent to whatever job it is. Some jobs more risky than others. Construction is one of those where it's probably more risky in terms of injuries than, my job as a lawyer, for example. But the whole point of workers' comp was to ensure that injured workers at a basic level get things like medical care and wage replacement and permanent disability benefits once their injury is kind of medically plateaued, and get them as good as they can back to work and compensated without necessarily punishing the employer. And so that's really what workers' comp is.
Right. And it's also a very misconception that a lot of people have. It's a lot of people think that just because you're going to go into the workers' compensation system and file a claim that you are suing your boss. So it's important to know that you are not suing your boss. Your company that you work for, your employer, pays an insurance company similar to the ones we would pay here in California if you're a driver. You have your car insurance. Well, businesses have to have workers' comp insurance, and that's the insurance that takes care of all the payments, meaning this is not going to come from your boss's bank account. It's not going to come from the company. It's going to come from this insurance company that is going to then handle your workers' comp claim. Yes, your boss does have to pay a premium on this insurance, just like we would with our cars. But that is something that I think a lot of people are afraid of to even move forward with, right? Because I have a cool relationship with my boss. I get along with my boss. I don't want to jeopardize the company. I want to keep my job. I don't want to be the bad person because I got injured. That's not how it works. And I hope that throughout this webinar, you guys get to truly understand that all we want to do is help you move forward and make sure that you guys are getting the fair compensation that you deserve. So, moving on to our next slide. The checklist is going to be given to you towards the end of the webinar, so make sure you stay towards the end, and we're going to be focusing on how to guide you effectively by following this checklist that you're going to get, I think one of the biggest things, Bilal, is you can avoid those common pitfalls, those common mistakes that a lot of people bypass or don't necessarily, I guess, think about or take focus on because they don't know the importance of it within the system. So we're going to want to be able to like handle this as well. So for those of you that want this, I guess, checklist and want to have an actual tangible copy, you will be receiving it. So let's start with reporting injuries. Bilal, tell us your take as a workers' compensation attorney, the importance of reporting your injuries and everything you know about this part.
I will say that as an attorney, and I've been doing this a long time now, one of the most common issues we run into is that an injury has not been reported, at least reported within a reasonable amount of time. And when you don't report the injury and you try to bring it up later down the road, the presumption, at least from the insurance side, is that you're either lying, making it up, or you just waited too long,
Yeah.
legally.
Okay.
And the sooner you report an injury, the better off you'll be in terms of your credibility with both your employer as well as the insurance company. A lot of people are put in a position where, maybe like you said, they don't want to upset their employer, or they think their injury is not that bad and they don't really need medical attention. Or, they're pressured by their employer not to report an injury. And not reporting an injury can be catastrophic to a claim later down the road, especially if you've gone to a medical provider and concealed the nature of your injury and lied about it just to protect your employer because you didn't want to actually pursue the claim. A lot of times we see people say they were injured helping a friend move or doing something on the weekend when in reality they were hurt at work. It's just their employer pressured them, or they had a relationship so they felt like they couldn't betray their employer, or they just didn't think it was that bad and didn't want to deal with workers' comp. And so a lot of times we see injuries get brushed under the rug. And at first it's usually okay. Most people think, oh, well, I'm not hurt that bad. I just need a day or two. It's where the injuries are really serious that it can come back to bite people in the butt. And I think more often than not, I see injuries that are serious. People requiring multiple surgeries, people who are off work for months, sometimes years, and they don't get the compensation they need. And they're left trying to pick up the pieces of their case and fighting after the fact to get the insurance company to accept liability. So, I can't speak enough about how important it is that people report their injuries as soon as possible, because if they don't, like I said, it can be catastrophic for the case.
Right. Is there, I know we have the DWC one form. Is there a place where someone can figure out if their employer filed this form for them? Because ideally, the employer would file the workers' comp claim for them, right? There's a part that they fill, and then there's the part that the employee, the injured worker, fills out. Is there a part that, like, say I'm working somewhere, how do I know that my boss actually submitted this form?
So insurance information is public record. There's websites that you can go to, for example, to search. One's called the WCIRB, which is an insurance bureau that you can look up your date of injury along with the employer's information. It'll actually tell you who the insurance carrier is, and you can contact the carrier yourself. In addition, in California, employers are required to have postings in the workplace with workers' compensation insurance information available to the employee. If those things are not available, you can always ask your employer for that information. But you're absolutely correct. The insurance company gets wind of the case usually because an employee fills out a DWC-1 claim form, which is a form that the employer is required to produce to the employee when they're injured. The employee fills out one part, the employer fills out the other part, and then the form itself is sent off to the insurance company. And that's what officially starts the claims process. And generally, you'll know if the insurance company got the case because they'll call you. More often than not, an insurance company will contact you to take a statement, to figure out what happened, make sure that you're going to the doctor and things like that, which is pretty standard in most workers' compensation cases.
What happens if you all of a sudden feel like, okay, yes, I'm injured. However, I'm trying to brush it off. I don't think it's that serious. Therefore, I don't report it right away. But then a few days, a few weeks later, hey, it's now kicking me in the butt. am I entitled to no longer saying anything? How do I deal with that? I think that's a common question we get a lot.
Yeah, people change their mind. Sometimes they think it's not so bad, or, like I said, their employer convinces them to not pursue the case, and, they'll pay their medical bills or compensate them for a week off work, whatever it is they need to get better and, get back out there.
Hmm.
Oftentimes that's not the case. And you can always go and continue to pursue the workers' compensation case, even if at first you feel like it's not that bad. Of course, you know, that's going to potentially be used against you. If you're seeing a doctor 6 months later and there's a medical record where you maybe went once or twice and told the doctor you're fine and you just want to go back to work, then, again, that could go to question your credibility, meaning, hey, you said you didn't have symptoms at first and now you do.
Yeah.
And, it's pretty common. I think a lot of people just try and tough it out. Most people don't want to sit on workers' comp. And I think more often than not, people are more likely to try to do the bare minimum of medical treatment and get back to work as soon as possible. And sometimes that makes the injuries worse. Or,
Yeah.
sometimes maybe they think they're just a little sore, but as they continue to work, it really brings out the symptoms.
Right.
And then they say, wait a second, this isn't right. I actually need serious medical care.
Okay, well, it's good to know that there are options, and obviously situations like this do happen. So I think it's safe to say overall it's important for you to report your injury. Best if it's in writing. Obviously, some cases people end up going straight to the hospital and there's no time for it to send a text message, to send an email. And the only way the employer gets notified is because coworkers were like, hey, this happened, and it's through a call or whatever, right? So there are steps you can take, and if it doesn't fall into this category, just know that there are options available if you know you get injured at work. So I think our next slide, Bilal, is going to be talking strictly about medical treatment, which is also another very important part in regards to the workers' compensation case. And a lot of things can fall in the cracks, especially on this section with medical treatments. One being that injured workers don't even know what they're entitled to, right? Two, I also believe that a lot of people don't take it serious. Like, let's say the doctor sends you to the primary physician sends you to physical therapy, and you're like, I don't really need it. It's not doing anything. I'm not going to show up. I'm going to miss my appointments. I definitely think it's very important for us to discuss this on this subject, and then you can also guide us on the importance of keeping everything documented as well.
Yeah, I mean, medical treatment's the mainstay of workers' compensation, and largely dictates how long your case will take and the pace at which it goes. It's important for you to go to your medical appointments because if you don't, for one, no one will take your injury seriously, and two, a medical provider may actually stop seeing you. I've seen a lot of clients who they miss enough medical appointments, and the provider actually drops them as a patient. But medical treatment's there for the benefit of the injured worker. It's one of probably the main components of the compensation part of the claim. The whole idea behind medical treatment in workers' comp is that the injured worker is not paying out of pocket for the medical treatment. They are not burdened with the cost. It's probably a longer conversation for another day about how often treatment actually gets approved and the appeals process, denials, and all that stuff. But, in a vacuum, in a perfect world, the medical treatment is there for you. And if you really are injured, you should take advantage of it. And I also think a lot of people, this kind of goes in line with reporting the case. Squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? When you go to your doctor and when you report your case, it's important to talk about anything and everything that you're experiencing. People often have a focus where they feel like this part of body or this system is my main concern, but they have other concerns as well. And those get brushed under the rug. They don't get treated. They don't get reported. And if they're brought up later down the road, it can cause problems again, because if you don't discuss it, no one knows about it. And if you bring it up later, the idea is that maybe it's not connected with your case. So
Right.
you really have to make sure you're on top of your treatment. You need to make sure that you're disclosing all your symptoms, any and all body parts, even if it's 1 out of 10 on a pain scale, it's there and it needs to be addressed.
Right. It's also important to note medical treatments obviously have to make you go to the doctor's appointments. You have to drive, and you're already out of work and not getting a full salary. So It's important to not only just document when you saw a doctor, take notes what the doctor told you. Always ask for the summary the when you're coming out and stuff like that, so that you can have this documentation that can help you along the way if things start to get complicated. Not to mention you get reimbursed for your mileage, so it's important to also note on there what time did you leave, how many miles. That way you can also get compensated for your mileage to the doctor's office, not and if you have to pay parking, tolls, etc., that is also something that you can essentially get your money back on. So again, the importance of documenting everything. It's better to have it than not have it in case you need it. And I think this is the part where a lot of people miss, right? There's times where things get complicated along the lines of a workers' comp claim. And then, it's your word against theirs. How do you show facts? How do you show that, yes, this indeed is what I was told? Because things can get lost in translation. Things can get also manipulated in some way, right? Words can be like, no, I didn't say that. And it's kind of like having this documentation is only beneficial for you as the injured worker. It's not common that you're going to come up and be like, look, I have proof, right? That's not how it's meant to be. However, there will be dates. Who knows, right? A deposition, I'm assuming they're going to ask questions, and you want to be accurate with what you're talking about. Therefore, you don't get caught off guard. Is there anything else, Bilal, that you think we can talk about in regards to the medical treatment aspect, appointments? Because I know we're going to jump into temporary disability in the next slide, and then obviously the importance of QMEs and AMEs. But how about we talk about when your case is a little bit like denied? How does the medical treatment come into play?
Sure. So your case can be dealt with in one of three ways when you first report it. It can be delayed, meaning the insurance company is going to investigate to make a decision about liability, but they haven't got all the information they need at first. So they want to take statements, they want to look at medical reports before they make a decision. The insurance company, it ultimately just admits your case from the get-go or after a delay status, then obviously it's called admitted liability. It means the insurance company is going to pick up the medical treatment benefits. The case can also be denied, in which case, the insurance company is not going to provide medical care or benefits to you. So you're basically left on your own to find medical treatment. Some people can do this because they have private insurance policies, either through a spouse or through their work, or sometimes they just pay out of pocket. On occasion, depending on where the person is, at least with my firm, we do have relationships with doctors where we'll set up people for lien treatment, which means the doctor essentially trusts our representation that the case is going to be ultimately accepted, and all the treatment they're providing now will be compensated later down the road by the insurance company, but they're taking a risk because we're sending them a patient to treat the client essentially for free to the client, in hopes that we have been able to get the case accepted later down the road, which means the medical bills that they incur along with the treatment will be paid. But importantly, I think one of the things doctors also do is they write work status reports, which are ultimately what guide whether or not someone's entitled to things like temporary disability that we're about to discuss. So, going to your medical appointments and continuing to get updated work status reports is crucial to continuing to receive benefits if your case is accepted.
Noted. Checklist. Are my documents in order? Am I getting the medical treatment that I deserve? Check, 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 check. It's very important. And yes, Bilal, you're right. We are moving into temporary disability, which is a whole nother benefit along with the workers' comp claim. So if you are in this part of your workers' comp case, it is important to understand the payments that are essentially being given to you. And I think, Bilal, you can kind of guide us a little bit as to what temporary disability accounts for, and how do we make sure that they're being accurate with what we are seeing and stuff in a claim.
When we're talking about financial benefits for workers' comp, there's largely two different types of benefits. There's permanent disability and temporary disability. Temporary disability benefits are considered a bit of a wage replacement. The whole idea is that you're off of work and you need financial resources while you're off of work, not earning a paycheck. And this benefit is designed to basically compensate you as long as the doctors feel as though you have an inability to work, or if you have work restrictions and the employer can't accommodate them, then you're entitled to temporary disability benefits. Temporary disability benefits can be paid up to 104 weeks within a 5-year period following your date of injury, unless there are certain exceptions, which do happen, things like amputations and eye injuries, HIV. There are exceptions to that, in which case you can receive temporary disability for up to 240 weeks. But I think most injuries are within 104 weeks tops. The benefit's supposed to be calculated at 2/3 of your average weekly wage. There are a couple different ways under the labor code that we're able to calculate what the appropriate benefit rate is. But just for example's sake, if someone was earning $1,000 a week, 2/3 of that is 670. So they would get $670 a week that's paid to them as temporary disability. Now, importantly, you take the gross number for their average weekly wage, not their post-tax earnings, because the 2/3 of your average weekly wage that's paid to you as temporary disability is not subject to taxes. So the check that the insurance company sends you does not have things carved out like state and federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare, SDI, or anything like that. What you get paid is actually yours to use. So, that is a benefit that's often disputed. A lot of times employers don't keep great wage records, or they misrepresent what an injured worker has actually been earning. They don't take into account overtime or tips or other things that should actually be taken into account when calculating what someone's temporary disability rate is. And it's one of the things we look at first thing when we get a case, is to make sure, someone's actually getting paid at the correct biweekly rate.
Right. And again, understanding these important rules and to what you're entitled to based on, whatever your salary is. It could be different for everyone, which I think is a misconception that a lot of people have, because it's like, oh, well, my uncle was on, he was on temporary disability and he was getting over $2,000. And it's like, it all depends on every position, every job. It's not the same. But I think it's very important to know. And I think people can tell when something seems off. It usually is. Something's not right. And speaking about things not being right, tell me a little bit more, Bilal, about what happens when payments stop. When all of a sudden you're getting your weekly check, your temporary disability, and all of a sudden you get nothing, and you haven't nothing's changed, and all of a sudden it's like, what happened? When would that come into play?
There are a couple different reasons why your benefits can be cut. The first, which I just talked about, was the fact that there are a limited number of payments that you get. Temporary disability and workers' comp doesn't go on forever. And, despite how long a case may take or how long a person may take to recover, there is a finite period of time that we have to work with. So, if you're at year number 6 in your case, you're not entitled to any more benefits. If you've already exhausted 104 weeks and you don't have a qualifying injury that's an exception, then that's it. Even if you're still off of work, even if you're still getting surgeries and things like that. So, for one, I think it's important to keep an understanding of what the timeline is and keep your case moving and keep your treatment moving as best as you can to ensure that you're not in a position where you've run out of time or benefits.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of things, you can also have your benefits cut because the doctor said you've reached permanent and stationary status. We call it maximum medical improvement now, but it's the same thing and they're used interchangeably. And that means that the doctor feels as though your medical treatment has plateaued, that really, at least for the foreseeable 12 months, you're not going to really change. And it doesn't matter whether there's additional surgeries or physical therapy, injections, medication, whatever the case may be. They feel like you've leveled out and you're basically as good as you're going to be. And when you reach that status, MMI or PNS, the doctor gives you permanent work restrictions, assesses whatever permanent disabilities you have from your injury. And that's oftentimes a cutoff point for benefits, because once temporary disability stops because someone is MMI, their permanent disabilities begin. And permanent disability payments are significantly lower than temporary disability in most cases, because the maximum rate is $290 per week, where temporary disability max rate is well over $1,000 per week.
Yeah. And again, there's all these other calculations that come into play as well with the permanent disability. I think one of the misconceptions that we want to kind of help you avoid to think that it's going to happen and it's not. A lot of people think that they can't work while they are on temporary disability. Can you talk a little bit about that? That's like a common misconception that people have. Well, I'm getting paid here. I can't, if I'm on modified duties, I can't go work, or how does that?
Yeah, this is probably one of the most confusing components of temporary disability for people. If you're off of work, you're off of work, right? You're getting benefits. That's clear. If a doctor just says, look, you fractured your spine, you shouldn't be working at all. Okay, cool. It's really clear. You shouldn't be working. You're just getting paid your temporary disability benefits and you're off of work. Where it gets messy is where people work more than one job, or they're able to have some limited function. The doctor said, you know what, maybe instead of working 8 hours a day, you're able to work 4 hours a day. So, they often wonder, am I entitled to temporary disability still?
Mm-hmm.
And they can be, and the answer is it depends, always. But where it gets messy is where people have two jobs, and because of one job at one injury or one injury at one job, they can't work the other, or they have a limited amount of work. Maybe they're only working 10 hours instead of 40, or maybe they have two jobs that they can't work. And there are legal issues that go into that, but every case is different. And I think just as a general rule, if someone is receiving full temporary disability, it means that they should not be working.
Okay, good to know. All right, well, let's move on to our next part of the checklist, which is going to be the importance of, when things are going downhill, how do you ensure that you are going to be taken care of? How do you know the difference between the doctors? Because you're going to go probably from one doctor to another if you need to be seen by a different specialty doctor. It's not always going to be your primary. And one of the biggest confusions I see a lot are qualified medical evaluators or agreed medical evaluation appointments. People don't understand what a QME or a AME process is. And this is probably the most important part of a case, this entire process. So can you walk us a little bit about, what people can expect from a QME, from an AME, how to navigate it, and what not to do? Most importantly, what not to do.
Don't pick the QME panel on your own.
Yikes.
that's not a good decision. But for those that are navigating this on their own, and you are going to pick your own panel, good luck and Godspeed. But do your research about the doctors first. For those that don't know what QMEs are, they're qualified medical evaluators. These are doctors that serve as neutral evaluators. They're not representing the insurance company. They're not representing you as the injured worker. Their whole job is to look at your case objectively and make decisions that can significantly impact your case, like whether you should be off of work, whether body parts are considered related to your injury, whether you've medically plateaued or still need treatment, whether you're entitled to other benefits like something called a supplemental job displacement voucher, whether you have any permanent disability following your injury. And there's really good evaluators and there's really bad evaluators. There's evaluators that are supposed to be neutral, but they clearly favor one side over the other. There's specialties that tend to be more conservative versus those that are more liberal, that help injured workers. And I think it's really important to understand that the QME really, at baseline, is in control of your case.
Yeah.
They really are. In probably more ways than most people understand if they've never been through it before. So now I'd say the number one mistake you can make and that you should not do is blindly picking a QME specialty or evaluator from a panel on your own. I know there's going to be people who want to brave this on their own. They feel comfortable and maybe they get lucky, but really it takes a lot of knowledge and experience in working with these evaluators to understand kind of who's who, who's going to write a good report, who's going to write a bad report, who's going to be on your side, who isn't.
Yeah.
And once you have a QME on a case, unless they die, they retire, they're unavailable, or they do something that's, overtly biased towards you or the insurance company, they're on the case. You can't get rid of them. And a really bad QME can really make your life hell.
That sucks.
So I would say, don't risk it on your own for one. But if you do go down that path, I think it's important to understand what to expect at your QME,
Yeah.
which is they're not a treating doctor. They are not there to actually give you the care you need. They're there just to make decisions about your case. And you get to a QME because someone has either disagreed with the treating physician or there's been a liability issue, meaning the insurance company has denied liability either for your case in whole or for a specific part of your body or system. So, the QME is not there to necessarily do anything for you medically. They're there they're called medical legal experts because they're addressing medical legal issues that come up into a case. I think one of the biggest misconceptions from people I see, they go to the QME and say, I went to this doctor, Dr. Bob, and he didn't do anything for me. He didn't
Yeah.
treat me. He just said, hey, I'm going to write a report and I'll send it to you in 30 days and the insurance company. And that's that. And that's pretty much accurate. Good doctors may have a better bedside manner and they may walk through the case a little bit, talk about more issues that are happening. But for the most part, there is an evaluator and that's it. Nothing more, nothing less.
It's important that you said it that way because, again, a lot of people feel like I'm going to go to another doctor appointment. They're going to like check my vitals and whatnot, but that's not the case. Think of this more as if you were going to a therapist and you're going to have a candid conversation and they're going to review some of the documents that your primary doctor has provided. They're going to go through your medical record and they're going to ask you questions, right? They're going to ask you, things related to the injury to kind of get a scope of everything that's happening in your case. So, with that in mind, it's important for you to be well prepared for this, Don't go in there thinking that, oh, I don't know what the doctor like. No, come in with your own notebook as well with all of your documents that we've told you to keep track in regards to appointments, what the doctors have said, dates, and this the feelings that you've been having, from like, hey, in the beginning of the stages of my injury, I was at a 10 in pain point. Right now I'm at an 8. So all this information is going to be crucial for this doctor to kind of evaluate your word versus the word of the doctors versus the word of the insurance companies. And he's going to try to come neutral into this and kind of say, okay, who's telling the lie? Who's telling the truth? Which is also another reason that you come prepared and show up to this important appointment. What happens if you miss a QME or an AME below?
It happens, if you miss a QME, meaning, there's, you just don't show up, you're a no show. You could potentially be liable for the late cancellation or no show fee from the doctor. Usually that gets brushed under the rug, when the case settles ultimately. But, that's no joke. Doctors charge sometimes $500 for a no show fee.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if you don't pursue a QME appointment, you can actually waive your right to the QME. If you had, say, a PTP report, primary treating physician report, that says your maximum medical improvement, but you disagree, you feel like you still need treatment, you would go to a QME to dispute that.
Right.
Well, if you don't go to your QME and you sit on it for too long, the insurance company could potentially press to have your case closed by filing for a hearing, and kind of ushering it along, at which point, if you waited too long, you may have waived your ability to go see a QME. Alternatively, if you've missed more than one appointment, the QME may not even agree to see you again. They may say, I'm just not going to schedule you, in which case you have to start the process over with a different QME. And so if you have a good QME, you could potentially lose that QME if you're stuck with going to another panel.
Yeah.
Then ultimately, it just potentially delays your treatment and benefits. If you're going to the QME for a reason, it's not just for fun. Usually that means there's a big issue. Either there's liability issue, a treatment issue, or body parts being disputed, work status issues. Oftentimes it's people's health and welfare on the line. And so getting to a QME in the first place, which sometimes can take months, is incredibly important. You've been waiting for this appointment for so long, you just can't miss it,
Right. And you'll see some of those bullet points on your checklist once you get it towards the end of the webinar. You'll be able to kind of figure out the important steps within the workers' comp, QME, and AME process. Again, what you say matters in this appointment. If you tell the doctor something that he does not like, in the sense of being rude or just, not really appreciating the work that they're doing, giving attitude, this could potentially change the outcome of your case as well. Remember, this process weighs heavily on your workers' comp claim. And
Yeah.
it'd be silly for you to screw that up with an attitude or with just not knowing the importance of this appointment, I guess we could
I
say.
do want to add, Carmen, if someone's by themselves and they've already got a QME, there's a legal procedure in which the attorney can get rid of that QME panel and replace the QME panel once the injured worker becomes represented. So if you're out there and you're on your own and you've already got a panel, a QME panel, but you haven't been to the QME appointment yet, and I highly recommend potentially talking to a lawyer first to ensure that the QME panel is a good panel to stick with, because if it's not, you may want to sign up with the lawyer and have them help you get rid of that panel. It's not too late. Once you've gone to the QME appointment, that's it. The QME is on the case. But if you've just got your panel, or you've had your panel and you're not scheduled yet, or you are scheduled but don't have the appointment yet, and you're kind of feeling uneasy, definitely, chat with a law firm first.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that. All right, well, moving on. Next, we're going to talk about the importance of documenting and communication, right? Obviously, this is something we've shared throughout the entire webinar. And for those of you that have not yet jumped on from the beginning of the webinar, we highly recommend for you to watch the replay and take it from the beginning, because there's crucial moments where you need to clearly communicate and document certain things that are happening. So tell me a little bit, Bilal, about what happens when things are not documented properly from, cases that you've handled. What are some examples you can share with us in regards to this would have helped a lot if this would have been done or documented or communicated? And yeah.
I think this is just a general problem that runs throughout pretty much every single workers' comp case. There's no case I've had where documentation's been perfect. There's a lot of people involved. You have the injured worker,
Mm-hmm.
you have their lawyer, you have the insurance company, you have their lawyer, you have all the doctors, you have utilization review, you have the court, you have IMR, you have secondary doctors, you have QMEs and AMEs. There's so many different people involved, and ensuring that everyone has all the necessary information at all the right times is probably one of the biggest frustrations and biggest issues we deal with at our law firm for workers' compensation cases. There's pretty much been no case that I can recall where I said, you know what, everyone was just on point. Everyone had all the information, everything's flying smoothly. That's never the case. Oftentimes people don't have what they need, and it can cause major problems depending on the circumstances. Probably one of the biggest, most frequent issues we run into is ensuring that employers receive up-to-date work status reports issued by doctors to continue temporary disability, or sending us medical reports with requests for authorization on time so we can follow up for utilization review decisions about treatment, or ensuring that we're even getting served with utilization review treatment decisions for treatment when we need to file IMR appeals on denials, having to fight to get those constantly. There's a lot of times throughout a case where we're paper pushing to the max. We have teams of people who are just calling and writing emails and faxing letters, filing for hearings just to get documents that we need to move a case along. I think at the outset of a case, one of the most important things you can do, obviously, is documenting your injury. Documenting who was there, when it happened, where it happened, what body parts, you're injured, whether or not, you need to see a doctor and things like that. Keeping everything in writing to the extent possible will only help you.
Yeah.
So I've never seen anyone who said, darn, I wish I really didn't write down who witnessed my injury now that the insurance company is denying it because my shady employer is saying it didn't happen,
Right. And it's clear to say, right, to keep all messages that you've sent to your employer, because you never know when that employer is going to come back, or the insurance company, and say, well, this here tells us it was not actually reported on this date, it was reported on that date, which then they cling on to, and well, because there's off dates, we don't really even know if this happened at work, and then that can open up a whole can of worms when it shouldn't have in the first place. So Number one, keep all correspondence, emails, letters, voicemails, you name it, any type of documentation you have, whether that's from your claim adjuster, even from your attorney, the doctors, your employer, your coworkers, keep it all together. Keep this little black book there because you don't know when you're going to need to pull that little black book. Speaking about communication, Bilal, if you are essentially still obviously employed and your very, very cool boss just tells you, all right, cool, well then, go do what you have to do. Don't worry about us. How important is it to keep your employer updated with your claim?
Super important. There's HIPAA laws that protect, you as an individual about what information needs to be disclosed to an employer. The employer just needs to know basically just enough information to determine whether or not they can have you in the workplace safely. And that's it. Your employer doesn't need to know what your specific diagnosis or treatment's been.
Right.
They don't need to know about non-industrial unrelated conditions. We have people who, for example, are HIV positive or have genetic or other, issues that they were born with or got throughout their life that had nothing to do with workers' compensation. They don't feel comfortable with their employer knowing that stuff. And that's great. That's how it should be. The employer has no business in your personal life. But as an employer, they have an obligation to bring you back to work if possible. They also have an obligation to ensure that they have a safe workplace for not just you, but everyone else around them. And so they need to know, can you do your job or not?
Yeah.
And that's really what the work status is about. The work status, it's a form typically that tells the employer whether or not you can go back to work, and to the extent you can, what limitations that you may have and what restrictions you may need to be able to go back to work. And so it's really important that you keep in communication with your employer for that purpose, if nothing else, just so that if you can go back to work, they know about it, they can bring you back. Alternatively, your work status may change and you may be at a point where the employer says, we can accommodate you, we can bring you back. And if they make an offer of work to you and you don't accept, and that offer is within your work restrictions, you can actually be terminated for job abandonment. And so a lot of times, we hear people say, oh, well, I haven't talked to my employer in 8 months, and we say, okay, well, have you had work restrictions? Does your employer know you have work restrictions? Do you know if they've offered you work that fits within those work restrictions? Oh, well, someone from HR has called me like 10 times, but I just never bothered to listen to their voicemails or talk to them. And we tell them, look, call them back ASAP. We want to make sure you still have a job, that you're not going to be fired. If the insurance company cuts off your benefits and it turns out you could have gone back to work, but you didn't, and you never called your employer, you can be in a lot of trouble. Obviously not legal trouble per se, but you're going to have a very weak argument that you're entitled to any benefits or potentially not get your job back. So, definitely stay in contact with your employer throughout the case.
Yeah, super important. Another thing to cross off from that checklist, obviously, to remember to keep in contact with your employer. Moving on, we are now going to jump into the settlements. And the reason why I titled this one Settlement Pressure was purposely, okay? Because there could be times where your case is running smoothly, where everything is aligning, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you get a settlement offer. So I want to, I guess, recognize those red flags when there is a settlement pressure happening below, especially for the injured workers who don't have representation. They're not being, represented by an attorney. How often do these settlement pressures come forward, and what are those red flags that they need to look out for?
I think the settlement pressure people have is just a reality of what's going on in their life. Last time I checked, most of us are not, billionaires. We're not, sitting on mountains of cash. We need our jobs. We need the work. We can't afford to not have an income coming in. And, a lot of people are put in a position where they're feeling the pressure for settlement, and it's because of the circumstances. The insurance companies denied liability for their case. They're not getting medical care. They're certainly not getting benefits, or they've already maxed out their temporary disability, for example. They can be in a position where maybe they're just wanting to put their family first. They've got kids that need to eat.
Yeah.
They have rent they need to pay. and they can't afford to just fight and fight and fight endlessly. And a lot of times they feel that pressure in an immense way throughout their case. And a lot of times they're questioning, is this a good time to settle or not? And generally you'll know when it's a good time to settle, right? Sometimes you'll know because you're forced. Other times you have the flexibility. And when you have the flexibility, you have a little bit more information in front of you. You can really analyze whether or not the offer that the insurance company making is really what your case is worth. I can tell you a lot of times insurance company likes to throw out numbers because they know you as an injured worker who's hurt, who's scared, who's alone, who is in need, and certainly isn't a multi-billion-dollar insurance company, may look at the money that's being offered as something that's valuable. And that's because it is. When you don't have an income in, you need to pay rent, put food on your kids' table. 10, 15 grand sounds great.
Yeah. 100%.
Um, 100%.
Yeah.
Is it what your case is worth? Probably not. In most cases, the offers are junk. They tremendously undervalue the case, but it's really a question of like, how do you identify whether there's going to be something else out there? How do you know if your case is worth more? I can tell you adjusters have what's called desk authority, which is pretty common. It means that the insurance companies give adjusters a blessing to offer X amount of dollars, whatever that is, without having to go above that. And if they go above that, they have to ask permission. They have to go to their boss and they have to work up the value of the case. So when adjusters can settle with desk authority, it looks great for them. They're settling with the bare minimum that they've been granted authority for from the insurance company. And usually that number varies. Sometimes it's 25 grand, sometimes it's less. You'll know it's a red flag when you don't have final reports from your treating doctor or a QME, and you're getting bombarded with letters and phone calls about take 10 grand, take 15 grand. Workers' comp is so formulaic. We have all these calculations for how benefits are calculated, what body parts are worth, if they're adjusted based on your age and occupation, all this stuff. And there's a finite amount that's calculated. We use very specific formulas. And so when a number is kind of just pulled out of thin air without being related to either, a liability decision or a certain medical report, that's a major red flag by itself. And that's one of the most common early settlement tactics that insurance companies use. They throw out numbers and they're not attached to anything. They don't have any meaning. They just say, hey, we're offering you 10 grand for your injury. And it's not based on anything.
This reminds me of that commercial where there's like the guy with the fishing pole and then he has $1 and then someone's trying to grab the dollar. It's like they're dangling this $10,000 amount in front of you to see if you'll take it, to see if you'll grab onto the hook and then be done with your case, when in reality your case could have been worth 100,000 and you just took 10,000, so it's kind of like really important to recognize these red flags that Bilal is definitely sharing with you. And understanding that, sometimes you can be tricked into things. Believe it, it happens. And don't trust that everyone's here to bat for you, that everyone's here to like have your back. That's not necessarily always the case. And it's important to know on these settlement offers as well. Is there anything else we want to discuss on settlements, Bilal, before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, the number being detached from anything is probably the biggest red flag. Also, too, if you haven't been deemed MMI yet, your case is accepted, you're still receiving temporary disability, for example, any settlement offer you get at that point is probably going to be substantially less than what your case is worth. Again, it's at that point, there's nothing to really use to come up with a concrete value. And so chances are they're just throwing out a number that's low enough for them where it's, based on their algorithms and past cases, maybe they think that's good for you, but it's really crap. That's a huge red flag too. And again, if you haven't been to a QME, for example, you've only been to a primary doctor that was maybe terrible and prematurely kicked you out and said, you're fine, go back to work. That can be another red flag if a settlement's based on that. I think the problem is knowing when a settlement is bad and knowing the red flags can be difficult for people to spot. But, if you're feeling pressured, I would encourage you to certainly talk to a lawyer. If you're going to talk to a lawyer about anything, settlements probably the biggest and most important component. And a lot of times lawyers should be able to tell you pretty easily, just looking at even the most basic reports, whether the amount that's being offered to you is really bad. And most of the time it is really bad. We settle cases where the first offers are 10 grand and we settle them for 50, 100,000, $200,000 later down the road. I'm just settling a case now. The person had a denial at first. They got nothing. And we're going to settle by an agreement that the person's 100% disabled and they're going to get benefits for the rest of their life. So, the crap offers that people get in the beginning of the cases aren't the end of the world for you. It's just about how you react and whether or not you seek help after that matters.
Mm-hmm. Definitely important. All right. Well, moving along so we can get you guys out quickly. We're going to talk about understanding the rights that you are entitled to if you are unable to return to work after a workplace injury. It's not the end of the story, as Bilal was just mentioning. It's not like, okay, cool, I'm screwed, I'm injured, I'm not going to be able to go back to work. There goes my life. There are rights that you are still entitled to. So, can you provide a bit of information in regards to the benefits that come if you can't return to work?
So if you can't return to work, there's something called a supplemental job displacement voucher, which is a voucher that injured workers get. And they don't necessarily even need to be displaced from their employment for this.
Right.
If you have permanent disability and an employer does not offer you permanent modified work or permanent regular work after you've been deemed permanent stationary MMI and you receive your permanent disability ratings, then you get this voucher. And this voucher is essentially a credit where you get up to $6,000 for job-related training and expenses, meaning, if you need to go back to school to re-educate yourself, to move into a different field because of your functional limitations, you need a laptop, you need miscellaneous reimbursement for course-related work and things like that. That's what this voucher is all about. In addition to the voucher, you get something called a return to work supplement, which is essentially a payment from the state of California. It's $5,000, and that you can use for whatever you'd like. If you want to go have fun in Vegas, you can do that, but it's really there as a benefit that's designed to help you get back on your feet and rehabilitate into the workforce. Really just a little extra bit of money. We used to have something called vocational benefits, vocational retraining, which no longer exists in workers' comp. So the supplemental job displacement voucher is basically the modern version of vocational rehabilitation.
Good to know. I definitely think that the checklist that we will be providing with you is going to talk about the job displacement or the job voucher, the vocational voucher and stuff. So that's also a step that you don't want to skip. Obviously, when you're going along your workers' comp claim, it's very easy to just skip through it because you don't even know that you're entitled to it. So on the checklist, you're going to receive on the bottom of it, which is going to be kind of similar to what we've just shared with you, you'll see that, hey, don't forget to check the box for this part. Are you entitled to it? Are you not entitled to it? If you are, what can you do about it and such? So as Bilal said, it's not the end of the road. There are options and even more benefits too for families who have lost a loved one and they no longer were able to survive the injuries. And, the family also has benefits in that sense. So that's also important for you to check off the box as well. So make sure that if you don't have the information that you seek help with a legal assistant and speak to a lawyer. I guess reviewing your case is free. Any workers' compensation lawyer can do that for you. If they're charging you, then don't go with them because this is free. It's supposed to be provided for free. And it really allows you to kind of figure out what the roadmap is going to look like for you, what decisions you need to make, and if you can do them by yourself or if it's best to be represented by an attorney because they will call out the red flags like, hey, they're doing some stuff to you. You need to make sure that you take care of X, Y, and Z. So very important for you to make sure that you seek for that, I guess, confidential claim evaluation within a law firm like Pacific Workers or someone else. Common mistakes. Bilal, understanding and avoiding those common mistakes is crucial, right? So can we recap a little bit in regards to some of the common mistakes that people do, which is one, missing the deadlines, not following medical advice, settling too soon, which we just talked about, poor communication, whether that's with the attorney or the employer, and assuming this is the part where I want you to kind of tell us. People assume that the system is automatic. The system just it works that way. I don't have to do anything. Please tell me a little bit about the way the system is not automatic.
Yeah, I mean, the system relies on you. You know, you have to make decisions. You have to go to medical appointments. You have to file forms. You have to request a QME. You have to, request hearings and file an application to have your course litigated in the court. You have to do all these things, and it's your responsibility. No one's going to hold your hand. If you're on your own, at least. If you have a law firm, we'll hold your hand. But if you're on your own, you have to be aware of deadlines and responsibilities and how serious they are, and the repercussions if you don't do things properly. There are a lot of things that are forgiving in workers' comp, and there's other things that are not forgiving. And if you miss something, that can be it sometimes. Common example is treatment. If treatment's denied by utilization review, you have to file an IMR application, which is the appeals process for it. If you do not file your IMR application on time, you've waived your right to the appeal. And that utilization review denial is good for 12 months. So let's say you need something like surgery, and had you appealed it, it would have got overturned and you get the surgery, but you missed the deadline. Well, that's it for 12 months at least. So you're not going to get the surgery. So it's really important, people are on top of what their responsibility is, really understand what their responsibility is, and understand, how serious it is.
Yeah, because even honest mistakes, because sometimes they happen, even honest mistakes can come in and kick your butt when it comes to a workers' comp claim. So I guess it's key to stay informed, and the checklist that you will be receiving at the end of the webinar is going to allow you to make sure that you truly are staying on track with your workers' comp claim, and that you are not forgetting any parts. So I think it's a very helpful resource to kind of help you feel that, okay, I'm getting my things done, I'm checking all the boxes, and it gives you a little bit more of that confidence that you're moving on. And if it's something that we've discussed where you're like, wait, I had something similar in that situation, please feel free to reach out with our team. They are on the chats as well, so make sure you guys ask questions so that we can get some of those answered for you towards the end of the webinar, which we're almost getting there. I promise you, we're almost done. So yeah, moving forward, common mistakes can happen. I guess it just depends on what you're going to do after that mistake has happened, and if you can fix that mistake once it's happened. I wanted to incorporate this part, Bilal, which is questions that the injured workers should be asking while they are working their claim, right? For example, some of the things that we touched on earlier, am I getting the correct benefits? Am I missing anything from my paperwork? Should I be speaking to an attorney? Those are like the number one common questions we get. What is a deposition? How do I file for my claim and such? All these questions answered when someone does an initial confidential consultation or case evaluation with a law firm. Are these things that can essentially be reviewed?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard as a lawyer to really get a great picture of a case from the beginning, especially if the person really doesn't understand workers' comp. They don't have any medical reports with them. They don't know whether their case is accepted or denied. And a lot of times we're really good at trying to ask the right questions to get the information out of someone. And sometimes, they just don't know, in which case, when we file the case, the insurance company serves us with the complete file with everything we need. But, when we have a consultation, we generally try to ask as many questions as possible for us to understand what's happened with the case, because it's super important that when we take on a case that we get the claim going as fast as possible. And if we have more information in the beginning, we can do that more effectively. So we ask a lot of questions about when they were injured, whether someone's continuing to seek treatment, if they're getting paid benefits, if at all, whether they have pay stubs so we can calculate the correct rate for their pay, if they've been to a QME or not, or if they have a panel we can, get rid of, or if we need to get a panel report first from the evaluator that we've already been to, we can request that. So yeah, we'll sort through and ask a lot of questions to kind of help us find our place on the map, but also to explain to people where they're at on the map and really help them understand just where it is they're going, where they've been, and what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Again, these questions are going to be noted for you on that checklist as well. So take a look at it. Once you get it, it's going to be sent to you via email. If you've just jumped on to our live stream on YouTube and you'd also would like to get a copy of this ultimate checklist for your workers' comp claim to stay on track, then write us a little message on the comments and tell us, hey, I'd like to receive this, and our team will send it to you as well. Again, understanding these rights are crucial steps for you to make sure that you are working the best outcome for your case. And yeah, with that, we are going to finalize this webinar. But in regards to the information, now we're going to move forward to our, Q&A session. I don't know if we have any questions coming in. I don't see any at the moment, Bilal, but I'm going to go ahead and get this started in regards to some of the questions that we do see often with our podcast, people that tune into our podcast as well, which, by the way, if you are interested, you can definitely also send questions on our Work Comp Talk channel on YouTube. That's our official podcast for Pacific workers. And we have this section where it's titled Better Ask Bilal. And if you have that itching, burning question that you just want to get out of your chest, you better ask Bilal and then figure out how to move forward from there. So, Bilal, I think one of the most common questions is in regards to the workers' comp, obviously, system, and how long does my case take? What is the average? I know that's a difficult question that you've answered before, but for those that are joining us for the first time, how long does a case usually take?
The average for us, as far as I recall, is probably around 18 months. That can vary wildly depending on the case.
Okay.
As a whole, how long do workers' comp cases take? I couldn't even give you an accurate answer. Every case is different. We have some cases going on that are 10 years old, and it's just because of the nature of the injury and the complexity of the case.
Right.
It's really someone's medical care that dictates how long a case can go on for. The more complex injuries, the more things that need to be addressed, generally, the longer the case takes. There's no official, start and stop time for a workers' compensation case. If you have a serious injury, I'd be very surprised if your case was anything less than, 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
If you have a simple, back strain or things like that, cases can take, 6 to 8 months, depending on, what's going on with them. The whole point is to ensure that they're getting the care they need and not rushing along their case, and making sure that they're given an ample opportunity, a fair opportunity to get the care they need to get better.
Okay. Noted. Let's see what we have here. I was giving a false cover letter by my claims adjuster. Can I use that against the insurance company? What does that mean? A false cover letter. Are they trying to play games? Would they pull things like where they give you misinformation so you can get confused and not know what to do with it? Is that a thing?
I see. Yeah. So this goes into communication, right? Sometimes we see that cover letters to QMEs may say something like, hey, Dr. Steve, this patient, Bilal is coming to see you. They filed a claim for an injury for their back. But I filed a claim for my injury to my back and my knee. And I go to the QME, and the QME is like, well, I'm only seeing you for your back. That's what the insurance company says you're here for. So stuff like that happens a lot. Sometimes authorization for a treating physician to see me may only say my back and not my back and my knee. And so I go to the treating doctor, and the doctor says, hey, I can only, do stuff for your back. I can't do anything for your knee because I need authorization from the insurance company. So sometimes the cover letters or communication that's sent to doctors can be inaccurate, potentially misleading. Whether or not it is done intentionally, more often than not, I couldn't tell you. But
Okay.
We do see that there's a lot of inaccuracies in cover letters or information that's presented to doctors. A lot of times, medical records are left out or important medical records are left out. So, someone will go to a QME and the QME doesn't have enough information in front of them to really write a well thought, relevant report. And that
Yeah.
can cause significant delays. So, yeah, I don't know if we'd call it false information in the sense that it was done intentionally, but misrepresentative or inaccurate information, yeah, happens a lot.
That sucks. Okay, we have we have a couple of questions in regards to I guess denials. So I'm going to go through some of those questions if I can pull it up correctly. It says, does the insurance really choose your doctor? And should I be worried if I didn't have a say?
Yeah, in terms of like a treating doctor, the insurance company has the right to medical control when you first report an injury. They get to send you to the work comp doctor within their network. So,
Mhm.
yes, at first they choose who your doctor is, but you don't have to stick with that doctor. Your injured worker has the right to free choice of medical care and can elect a different treating physician if they want to. Um, if it's a medical provider network, they have to stay within the MPN. If there's no MPN, then they can go to whomever they want, provided the doctor will accept them as a patient for workers' comp. But yeah, at first, injured worker does not have control of who they get to go see. There are exceptions to that if you've had a pre-designated physician and stuff. Most people don't. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of the exceptions, but there are exceptions to why you don't have to always go to the same doctor that the insurance company would send you to at the beginning of the case.
Good to know. Well, I think that wraps up for the rest of our webinar, unless someone else has a last minute question that they would like to drop on the comments. I promise you, if you're watching this webinar towards, during your lunch break, it wasn't actually while we were doing this live, and you still leave comments for us below, I will be more than happy to continue to answer these throughout the rest of the weeks, months, whenever we do get notified as well. So, again, thanks to everyone who's watching this. Make sure you keep an eye out for that email that's going to send you that ultimate checklist. And then, not to mention, another important email that is going to ask you to take a quick survey for us so that way we know exactly what you want to touch on in regards to the workers' comp system and what you want us to focus on for the next webinar. We are doing these webinars once a month, and we hope that if you didn't get to enjoy this one or watch it with us comfortably live, you can do so next month. Or if you know someone who's been injured and can use this information, please make sure to share it. While you're at it, if you're on social media, follow us. You can find us everywhere under Pacific Workers, or also with our podcast, Work Comp Talk. Yes, we do speak Spanish. So if you have parents or family members that are injured at work and they need the help as well, we have an entire team that also speaks Spanish, and we're here to help everybody in California. I don't care if you're in Southern California, Northern California. Obviously, we are, Bilal is allowed to practice in all of California. And being that he's from San Diego, he gets the best of both worlds. So, anything else you'd like to share, Bilal, before we close this webinar out?
No, I think we covered everything.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for watching. We'll catch you guys on the next webinar next month. And if you haven't yet, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button on our YouTube and follow us everywhere on social media, or visit us at pacificworkers.com. We'll catch you guys next time. Bye.